Good morning, everyone, and
Yeah.
happy Friday. Welcome to our Friday Facebook Live segment, Caring Conversations. And we're here and we're looking forward to bringing topics that are relevant to our clients, their families, our caregiving teams, and our healthcare partners. My name is Julie Collada, and I am the founder and president of Open Arms Solutions. Open Arms is a home care company, and we provide a professional, compassionate care team of caregivers and care coordinators to help seniors and their families navigate the challenges of aging and illness and proudly supporting their dignity and independence in their own homes. With me today is our own Scott Tolan, who is our director of our memory care program, Embraced by Open Arms. And our topic today is a really important one, and that is, and something that Scott's been living with every day, which is how to choose and work with a caregiver for your loved one with dementia.
Correct.
So very quickly, a little housekeeping for those of us that are joining this morning. If you have a question for us, specifically Scott, if there is a chat area in the bottom of the screen, so please enter your question, and Scott and I will do our best to answer your questions. So, Scott.
Yes.
You've been with Open Arms now over a year.
Yes, just over a year.
And we went through a very rigorous process to find you. We hired a consultant in memory care, and she helped us put together the guidelines for the right person that lead us in this passion of ours, memory care at home. And we found you.
Correct.
And can you just take a minute and tell everyone who's listening, some people know this, but some people who are newly viewing you and us don't.
Sure.
So please just take a few minutes and just describe your backgrounds.
Of course. Well, as you know, Julie, but as you say, others might not, my background in aging is fairly deep. I started a number of years ago in the field and was working for an assisted living company and really had the opportunity to get my first taste, if you will, of working with people with dementia. As part of my responsibilities when I first joined that organization, I was responsible for working with their dementia area in the community. And it was a several-day affair, and it was just a huge eye-opener for me in terms of working with folks who have memory impairment or dementia. And as I like to say, I caught the bug at that point. I just had found my passion. And after many years of various positions in the aging field, I actually began focusing on that with some additional work in both assisted living and skilled nursing, working as a dementia director. So working with folks with dementia issues on a daily basis. And over time, kind of built my expertise in this area. And then about a year or so ago, when I saw this position available, I said, wow, that's a position for me. And that's when I applied. And as you say, that's when our relationship started. So
I'm really glad you did. So, and I want to say, because you're being modest, you hold 2 master's degrees.
I do.
You hold a master's degree in gerontology.
That's correct.
And you hold a master's degree in communications.
Correct. Both of which come in very handy in this role. So
yes, yeah. I can see that they do from watching you. And I will also say that you're very committed to memory care in Chicago. You're very involved in organizations that are committed. And so
correct.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's just the topic is how to find, what to look for, how to find and select a caregiving team to care for your loved one with dementia.
Exactly.
That's our topic. And so let's start with some questions for you.
Absolutely.
So Scott, from your experience, and I do want to say, you spend most of your time here at Open Arms, well, some of your time, I should say. Once we bring a client on board that has memory impairment and we enroll them in our Embrace program,
correct,
then you are very hands-on in selecting the caregiving team.
That's correct.
So you work very closely with our scheduling team and care coordination team to select that, to make the appropriate selection, which is so important. So based on your experience, what type of characteristics should a loved one or someone who's listening in and is going through this with a family member, and either they themselves need to work with their loved one or they're looking for a caregiver to help, what are some of the characteristics should I look for in a caregiver to work with my family member with memory impairment?
Absolutely. Some of those same characteristics, Julie, are consistent across our caregiver base that we would ask for any of our caregivers. But I think several of those that I would highlight for caregivers who are working with people with dementia, at the top of the list would have to be patience. We all know that it can be very frustrating to work with individuals with dementia. So the caregiver must understand that and have a tremendous amount of patience. Flexibility is also one that I would mention.
Sure.
Some caregivers, and this is perfectly fine, but they have a more kind of task-oriented focus where we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And I think while that can work to a certain degree with people with dementia, we really have to be very flexible, and we can't necessarily have those kind of rigid guidelines or rigid approach.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm sorry, Scott.
No, go ahead.
Can I add something from personal experience?
Absolutely.
About flexibility and patience. So I think many of you know, who have listened in before, that I got into home care because of a personal experience I had with my mom, who was diagnosed with a mixed dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and vascular dementia. And one of the things that I, discovered is so many people who care for loved ones that have some kind of a dementia is that one of the best gifts you can give them is to allow them to do as much for themselves as they can.
Correct. Absolutely.
And I know that and I've said to many people when I talk and do speaking that I wish I knew then what I know now when I was having that relationship with my mom, because what typically would happen, and my mother-in-law, who we sadly lost about a year ago, who had Alzheimer's, we get into this fast-paced life where it's time for dinner, need to set the table, need to go, to the whatever it is. Yeah. And so then often, and I personally would go through this, that I wouldn't let my mother-in-law, we wouldn't let our mother-in-law set the table, because that would have taken way longer. It would have taken an amazing amount of patience.
Right.
And flexibility.
Right.
So, yes.
Well,
that's really important.
It's funny, Julie, that you mentioned the setting the table example, because interestingly, my next comment was going to be about a somewhat more unique characteristic that we look for, particularly, I think, with our caregivers who want to be part of that Embrace Memory Care at Home program that we've spoken about. And that's what I talk about. It's called more or less creativity. Creativity from the standpoint of, can this caregiver what I call think on the fly or think on their feet? And I had already thought about a really good example that I was going to use today. And so it's a really nice dovetail from what you were just saying. I was talking with a caregiver not too long ago, and she relayed a really great story to me. She said, well, here's what I think of when I think of creativity. I was working with a woman for quite a while, and this woman historically was used to giving a lot of dinner parties. And apparently one night she became very agitated because she believed that the guests were coming to the party and she had to get things ready. And look, we don't have things ready. So this caregiver had to really think on her feet and rather than just verbally trying to kind of deal with this situation with the client, she created this very interesting scenario where she started helping the woman set the table as though they were going to actually have the party. And through that process and some additional conversations with the client, she was really able to kind of calm her down and convince her that there probably wasn't enough time left now in the evening to have the party, and maybe we ought to call the guests and tell them we need to reschedule. So that's just the kind of, creative thinking that we want to see in our caregivers and working with people.
Yeah, that's a great example, Scott.
Yeah.
And, the caregiver engaged the client, got her involved in the process.
Exactly.
Versus, unfortunately, what happens so many times, and I know this again from personal experience, and I know from the years we've been doing this at Open Arms, a lot of caregivers would just say, "There's no party."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's because they didn't have the training.
That's right.
They didn't have the training and they didn't have the experience. Not that they're not great caregivers.
Right.
But they just didn't have the tools to
execute. Yeah. Right.
Execute those things.
Exactly.
Well, that's a really great story.
Yeah.
So I heard flexibility, patience, creativity.
Yeah.
So how do I assess those characteristics because that's what you do so often.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really starts with just the idea of having an open and honest conversation on both sides, both from the standpoint of if it's us with Open Arms providing services and also with the client's loved one, typically, where we're honest and say, what's working, what's not working, do we need to do some tweaks here? At Open Arms, of course, we have the opportunity, we have the caregivers, of course, we have our care coordinators, and if it's the Embrace program specifically, then I get involved. But it's just having that open and honest conversation about what characteristics are really right for this particular individual. I think that's really key.
And that makes great sense. And when you're talking to the caregiver, the applicant, if you will, they're our caregiver, but they want to be on an Embrace client, a memory care client.
Right.
You really talk to them before saying, you know what, I think this is going to be a good fit. This program is really going to be a good fit for you. Because I want it to be a good fit for the caregiver.
Right.
So what kinds of questions might you ask the caregiver or get information you get from the caregiver to help you know they have or believe they have patience, creativity, flexibility?
No, that's a good question. And I do go through that kind of interview process, if you will. I've already spoken to a number of our caregivers, for example, at Open Arms about this. But, first of all, understanding, do they have a background at all in working with clients with dementia? Not only do they have a background, but do they have a real kind of respect, appreciation, and possibly passion for that? I mean, some of our caregivers have really demonstrated to me that they really want to work with people with memory impairment or dementia. But then I also ask them some rather difficult questions, and I pose it in either an actual or hypothetical situation. So, for example, I say to them, what would you do if a client spit in your face? It's a very direct kind of question, but it elicits a real understanding or not of what that person would do in that situation. Mm-hmm. Another example is, what if you felt physically or verbally threatened by a client with dementia? How would you handle that? And so those are the types of things that I really like to get a feel from the caregiver as to how he or she would address those types of situations.
Yeah, that's so key, Scott, because it just makes for, we are so fortunate at Open Arms. We've had caregivers that we're in our 12th year, about to go into our 14th year.
Yep.
And we have some caregivers. I can think of several right now. I don't know if Belinda Miller is listening, and there's so many great ones. So I'm a little, I shouldn't be naming who some of our, wonderful caregivers are, because we have so many.
Just one that comes to mind.
I watched Belinda with our client that she's been with for, oh my gosh, I don't know how long, 8-9 years.
Yeah.
And Belinda gets incredible joy. And when she tells the stories about how she got her client to get up in front of a group of people because she belonged to a choir and sing, and how proud she was to listen to her, and how, the relationship that's bonded, it really comes from, and it stems from the passion that she has to make her client feel good, and make her client live every day and to her fullest. It's a really exceptional thing to watch.
And yet Belinda is a good example of one of our longtime caregivers who kind of takes the approach, I haven't learned everything, I don't know everything, and that's why she ended up taking part in our Embrace Lab training. So that's what we're looking for from caregivers, is saying, I may have a number of years of experience, but I'm always open to learning new techniques, new approaches, and that's what we really strive for. So.
And that is such an important point, because you're doing some training with our care team, which is we believe is incredibly important.
Correct.
And for a lot of the caregiver, I would imagine for all of them, they've never been through training like this, where you use improv and role play.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of how you train the caregivers specifically to work with memory impairment? What questions families should ask when of their care team, and what kind of experience they have?
Of course. So I think first it's important to acknowledge that based on the recent changes from the Illinois Department of Aging, as far as caregivers handling or working with people with dementia, there are some minimum requirements, and we certainly at Open Arms follow those. And a lot of those requirements are met through online training, which we do provide. And we require our caregivers ultimately to complete that. But we, particularly when it comes to our Embrace program, but also just our dementia clients in general, we really go the extra step, and we do I run a live training that we are still able to do, thankfully, in a limited fashion due to COVID. We bring 4 caregivers in at a time, and we do a live training. It's a 4-hour-long training. But as you say, it gets into some really more advanced techniques in working with people with dementia. Concepts like improv, which is taken from the improv world of theater and comedy. Concepts like validation, which have been around a while, but I think are getting sort of a fresh perspective in our training. And so it's approaches like that. And I've had any number of caregivers, thankfully, tell me afterwards, wow, I've done a lot of work with people with dementia, but this has been really helpful. This has really helped me kind of refine my skills in the process. So.
And that's always great to hear. And I went through the training, as did all of our staff here at Open Arms.
Correct.
And I will tell you that, one of the things that you mentioned that's so important for a caregiver to have is creativity.
Right.
And so, you have to practice that creativity, and you have to have a toolkit to help you. And so the improv that you take us through, and the role play that you take us through are just incredibly valuable tools. So that when you're confronted, what's the saying, Scott? I'm sure you, and I may not get this right, I'm going to try, every person with dementia is an individual with dementia.
I think, and it's interesting, once again, Julie, we're in sync, because I had written this down on my notes here as an aside. I think what you're referring to is the statement that if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia.
Yes.
And then we have learned over many, many years that that's very true.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think we are like-minded, so that's great.
That is good.
So we have a couple of viewer questions, so let's make sure we can pop those in.
Sure.
So the first question is, Scott, what activities do you suggest for families to do with loved ones with dementia?
Yeah, so I think to kind of unpack that question, a lot of it has to do with, I think, the level where the person is at with his or her disease. So in general terms, we talk about early stages, moderate stages, late stages, and then end stages. So I think whomever is asking the question, I would need more information as far as, where's the person at with his or her disease. But I can give you some examples. So what we try and do in the Embrace program specifically is we try and take activities that the person has always done throughout his or her life, but now maybe isn't able to any longer, and we modify that. So, for example, if someone has always been a lifelong gardener and has done a lot of gardening outside and a lot of physical labor associated with that, but really can't do that anymore, either physically or cognitively, then we try and say, okay, well, is there a way that we can maybe do a raised bed on the outside where the person doesn't have to bend down so much and can water appropriately and care for those plants? Or can we move that inside? Can we get some plants that really just require some TLC, and that the client's going to find purpose in just maintaining those over time? So again, I think that the best answer to that question is, let's focus on modifying what the person's done historically for their success.
So, and thank you. That is one of the pillars for the Embrace program.
Yes.
And as we, and that's just such an important thing, is that as people are at different stages of memory impairment and their cognition declines, you can still do activities.
Exactly.
And they can still get enjoyment out of them. The key is that you modify them so they can have success with it and they can have enjoyment. So if you take your example to someone that has really had the disease for a long time, and they're in the latter stages, and you might just start. Then maybe the best thing that can happen and they could still get joy out of is looking at a colored book, maybe with scents, pictures of different flowers, and having the caregiver just talk about it.
Exactly, having a conversation.
Look at other gardens. But there's just so many ways to modify these. But the whole goal is you meet the client where they are.
Yep.
And the goal is to get that engagement and that smile.
That's correct. Yep. Well said. Looks like, Julie, just to take our questions here while we have them. There was another question that says, can I give an example of an interview question? We talked a little bit about that, but I will give another example. If I'm a loved one, or in my case, if I'm interviewing a caregiver who I'm trying to, determine whether that person's appropriate for working with people with dementia, I simply ask them, can you tell me about a specific example or a specific person with whom you have worked? And then I add, can you tell me about something special that you did for that person that no one else was able to do, or no one else had ever done for that person? Mm-hmm. Because to me, that makes the connection between understanding that the person has dementia, but also recognizing that as a caregiver, I can bring a unique set of skills and a unique set of opportunities to this person. So that would be something that I would want to know if I were a loved one.
Great questions. Yep, those are great. Let's look at another question here.
Sure.
As family members overseeing the work of the caregiver, what are some of the most important things I can do in working with that caregiver to best serve my loved one?
Yeah, and I was going to touch on this earlier, so I'm glad we got back to this. I think what works really well for me when I talk to client loved ones, and what I would hope that those individuals share with caregivers who come in to take care of their loved one, is a little bit of history. What's their experience? What has worked in working with this loved one with dementia? And on the other side, what hasn't worked? Now, as you know, we also have tools with the Embrace program that we use to really kind of address some of that. So, for example, when we go in and work with our Embrace clients, we have what we call the life story. So I will sit down with the client's loved one, and ideally the client, if possible, and go over what are some of those really important historical details of that individual. And so we get that history and we get that background, and that can really be critical for caregivers working with people with dementia. And then the second tool we use is our engagement or activity tool. So as we were saying a little bit ago, we really get into the details about, we want to know this person. We don't want to just think of them as somebody that we're completing a series of tasks on. We want to know them as a whole person, where we're getting information about what they've enjoyed doing all their lives and what we think can still work for them. And that's where the conversation between or among the caregiver and the client's loved one, and again, possibly the client, and then if I'm involved for Embrace myself. So it's a real team approach in terms of making sure that we're serving the client in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's great. And I will also add that, that question was about family members overseeing the work of a caregiver.
Yeah.
I think what we've discovered is that it's so important for the caregiver to have like a coach.
Yeah.
And a resource, because what was working well for that client can change in a moment.
It really can, Julie.
And as much great training as you provide and as much great experience as that caregiver has, there are going to be those days and times where nothing's working.
Right.
Trying to be creative, trying to be flexible, but one of the things that you're responsible in overseeing this program is to be available to that caregiver to support them and really just figure it out and help, with your creative brain and experience, help them think of different approaches and for the family as well.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Julie. I'm fielding any number of calls now on a fairly regular basis from not only our Embrace caregivers, but other caregivers maybe who have gone through the training and or have questions about clients they're working with who have dementia or memory impairment. So from that standpoint, I'm working very closely with the caregivers. But as you say, on the other side, I am available, and I have already done a fair amount of work in supporting family members and addressing their needs and concerns. And so it's really kind of a two-way street.
Yeah. Yeah, that's support is needed all the way around. So we only have just a couple minutes left, but an important question: do support services and resources exist for helping family members navigate caregivers' experience for my loved one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that in there. Certainly I would refer more generically to the web and to the internet and looking for suggestions about, what questions should I ask of caregivers? What should I know about the client caregiver relationship? That information in more general terms is available. I would also encourage family members to definitely take advantage of the numerous support groups that are available throughout the Chicagoland area. We're really fortunate here to have an extensive network of those for different topics: younger onset, specific types of dementia, Lewy bodies or frontal temporal. So do some research or reach out to us, and we can steer you in the right direction, because there's some really good quality support groups there. And
That's
then
a great idea.
Yeah, and then I would just say in conclusion, I mean, obviously, if your loved one is a client of Open Arms, feel free to take advantage of my role and our resources here, because that's why we're here. So,
All right, terrific. Well, Scott, thank you.
You're welcome.
It is a passion of ours, all of ours, to help
Absolutely
loved ones and their families with dementia and bring joy to their lives. So
yes.
Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.